Welcome back to Global Money Talk, live from the New York Stock Exchange. There is something more powerful than luck or coincidence for achieving financial independence, and that is planning. So instead of leaving things to chance, working with trusted professionals to manage assets can mean building custom plans based on knowledge. Today I'm joined by Daniel Pan, the Vice President and Financial Advisor at the Lake Spire Group of Raymond James. Dan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Really looking forward to this.
Yes, likewise. Well, first and foremost, can you tell me and the viewing audience a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I started in the financial industry in 2000. I actually started on the buy side working for a registered investment advisor, building custom stock, bond portfolios, working on some wealth management tactics as well. And then in 2003, I went to go join the people that were covering me at Lehman Brothers in their private client group. And Lehman was a great firm, some of the best people I've ever worked for. But obviously, we know what happened to Lehman. So it turns out the Friday before the bankruptcy, my team and I had actually left Lehman to join Deutsche Bank Securities. And I'll never forget, getting out of the Wall Street subway exit and looking at my BlackBerry, and it was totally turned off. We knew the Lehman days were over for then, but then, Deutsche Bank was a great place to work for. Learned a lot of institutional expertise, and in 2016, Raymond James came and bought the Deutsche Bank Wealth Management Unit, and then we were the Alex Brown division of Raymond James, and then a couple months ago, I was able to go relocate somewhere a little closer to home. So now I work in the Morristown branch, but still come back to the city quite often.
And that is quite the trip down memory lane.
Yeah, it
and
was.
Just hearing a BlackBerry being mentioned, that
Yep.
does really take you back to
Yep.
certain points in time. So tell me a little bit about your clients and your work with the Lake Spire Group.
Sure. So we could probably break our clients into kind of three main types. We have business owner clients who, we've helped kind of advise pre-sale throughout the sale of their business, and definitely earlier stage business owners as well who need to work on, things like HR benefits and, maximizing the gifting to their employees. I would say the second group is our multi-generational families, where we started working with the mother and father, but then as the children grow older, we've helped educate them. We started off with the 529s, and then they become clients themselves. And often with the multi-generational families, what we do is we do a lot more of the trust and estate planning work. In fact, I just had some clients that we just did some Medicaid planning with, and it was great to shelter those assets, but I think what I saw out of that was I saw a family coming together, talking about the future. The daughter's role was more the healthcare role. The son's role would have been the property maintenance. And, the four of them, with me, of course, had this really good conversation about what's going to happen in the future. And, it was just nice to see the family come together for something like that.
And Dan, I have lots of conversation about multi-generational wealth, and one thing that seems to stand out is that we're living a lot longer than we used to decades ago, or even compared to the previous century. So I'm guessing that these conversations are key to the clients that you serve.
Sure. And in fact, I would say one of the great things about Raymond James is that they have a dedicated longevity planning group. So, I would say previously the conversations we would have, whether I was doing a full retirement plan, you can always talk about the numbers, right? The numbers don't lie, the numbers are the numbers. But when you talk about longevity planning, Raymond James even brings in things like we have papers on how to retrofit a house properly for someone who is in a wheelchair. The cost break even of nursing home care versus in care. And then we also like to have them really thrive in retirement. So a big part of our longevity planning is committing a substantial amount of your assets to doing fun things, doing things you enjoy, their hobbies or just whatever it might be.
And Dan, that does make sense since everybody works hard to reach that retirement age, so you just want to make sure that you have planned for that retirement.
Sure.
And speaking of housing, I do want to ask you about 1031. So can you explain to your viewing audience what this is and what it entails?
Sure. So 1031, just going to double check. So according to the IRS section 1031, a 1031 exchange allows an individual or people that own appreciated real estate to essentially defer the taxable gain along with the depreciation recapture. You can defer that as long as you buy another property of like kind, they call it. And what we like about that is by deferring the tax, I mean, eventually you're going to pay it, but by deferring it, you basically start with a bigger asset base, and then you can compound that over time, and it leaves a lot more wealth in your pocket versus just doing an outright sale or maybe even a cash out refinance. So it's something dear to my heart. It's something that I'm considering both myself and for some clients. And I could walk you through it if you like.
Yes, I think that would be very helpful for our viewing audience to actually see what this looks like and what the cost benefit looks like.
Sure. So I'll give you a case study. We'll just take an example and kind of show you what it'll look like. So if we can go to slide 1, that would be great. Okay, so in this example, we have someone who owns a current home. It's $2 million, right? There is a mortgage on it about $425,000. So the homeowner now has about $1.575 million of their equity. However, there's also depreciation recapture. So that's going to be big. So really, if they were to sell the home, pay the taxable gains, pay the depreciation recapture, we would only have $1.125 million left. Whereas if we were able to do a 1031 exchange, we're talking about having a lot more buying power. So in this example on the right hand side, you see by doing the 1031 exchange and assuming a 50% down payment on a new property, you could buy $3.15 million of property, whereas if you just do a sale, pay all the taxes, pay the depreciation, we're left with buying power of $2.25 million, right? That's almost $1 million difference. But now if we go to say slide 4, right? What we're going to do is we're going to look at 20 years in the future. Right? If you did the 1031, got a big mortgage, and kept paying the mortgage down, and the property grew versus just selling it outright, and after 20 years, you're looking at about $4.5 million, net of taxes, net of everything, of wealth created with the 1031, versus about $3.2 million of wealth created and wealth in your pocket if you just did an outright sale. And one thing I would also say is that this is assuming just a 50% down payment. For people that can get a bigger mortgage with more of an LTV, you can really push the numbers. It does require you being a landlord, which I've done for a while, but I believe it's a really good way to maximize value.
And I think, Dan, this was very helpful to see this hypothetical example there. But in terms of time horizon, are there any things to consider here when we're looking at 1031s?
That's a great question. I would say it does cost a lot, right? When you're buying and selling properties, even if you have a real estate agent giving you a good deal, right, you're going to pay those fees, you're going to pay all the closing costs. It's always a big out-of-pocket chunk when you're buying real estate. So I would say you typically want to do this, at least have a 10-year time horizon in the new property. You can get lucky. It could be an expanding area that all of a sudden the property's tripled. Maybe you sell it, but I think for the most part this is probably a 10-year type of trade when you do it.
So you would say at least 10, if not longer, in terms of time horizon.
Correct. Yes. Unless you get it really lucky.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Dan, also, I do want to hear a little bit more about the Delaware Statutory Trusts and how they would actually fit into a 1031 exchange.
Sure. So basically, I'm sorry, 1 second. Okay. So far, what I've been referring to has been an investor, who owns a property directly, sells it, buys another property directly. That's for the investor who doesn't mind being a landlord. There are cases when the investor just, whether someone in the family passed and he's inheriting it, they just might not want to be a landlord anymore. And by incorporating IRC Section 721 with a Delaware statutory trust, it allows them to basically sell the property and buy a like kind of real estate partnership. So you can still own real estate, but you've essentially outsourced the management of that to another company.
Okay.
And you can still defer the capital gains, you can still defer the depreciation recapture. So it can make sense, but now you have to do diligence on the manager, make sure they have the proper diversification within real estate sub-asset classes, geographies. But again, you're not doing the blood and sweat yourself. So it does pay to outsource when you want to. And I would say also the last component with a 1031 is also with IRC Section 721. A large real estate investment trust, a REIT, could be a public company REIT. They could buy property by using their shares. So again, we'll refer to someone who owns a building, his or herself. They own the hard asset, right? They could sell that to a real estate investment trust, receive shares of that REIT itself instead of the property, and that could qualify for a 1031 as well. So what's kind of new in the 1031 real estate space also is with the DSTs and with IRC Section 721, we have the ability for someone to sell a hard property, right? They can sell it into one of these real estate partnerships, and then there's the ability for that then to become part of a larger REIT. So you can diversify out of the single or multiple buildings you own. You can diversify across geographies. You can avoid certain sub-asset classes of real estate, whether it's office or medical, if that's your choice. But it gives you a lot of options. And again, you're not worried about being the landlord. You're not worried about flooding in your individual property. It just makes sense for the right person.
And in this day and age where we're hearing about so many weather-related type events affecting properties, I think that is an important consideration. But
sure.
Dan, for viewers out there who might be watching this and they're curious about how they can access 1031 exchanges, especially for viewers here in the U.S.,
sure.
What would you say to them?
Sure. It's an evolving marketplace. Traditionally, this was done through 1031 specialists. There is, which I didn't mention before, there is a 1031 intermediary who is tasked with running all the numbers, with kind of maintaining specific logs of what's happening, because the government only gives you 180 days to find a replacement property.
Okay.
So going through an intermediary is definitely the right thing, because that's what they're experts in. So I think for a long time, it was those intermediaries. They would also have the deal flow. They would be in touch with a network of sellers. They'd have a network of developers. So that was how it was done. And it's still done to that extent, but I believe now with IRC Section 721 and the Delaware statutory trusts that you're going to see, and you're starting to see, these types of solutions being offered on wealth management platforms, because now you have professional investment managers who come into the space through a DST, through an UPREIT structure. And in fact, at Raymond James, we do have a solution for 1031s. This has to be for the investor who does not want to be a landlord, wants to outsource the management. But it's a good source, and it's considerably lower dollar values than some of the traditional 1031s are being done at. So, smaller investors may be able to access that.
And so, when you're talking about 180 days, that's roughly about 6 months, right?
Correct.
And on average, just based on some of the clients that you have seen go through this process, is that typically a reasonable time frame?
It's reasonable. It's definitely tough, but I think what a lot of 1031 candidates do is they go out and find the property they want to buy first, because that's always seems to be the wild card. They have the property they want to sell. They've already had engineers take a look at it. They know it's in great shape, right? It's kind of predictable, right, to a certain extent. But if you don't kind of have the property selected first, 180 days it's not a lot of time. You're right, and you could have a seller that just doesn't want to move quickly, and then the whole 1031 is down the tubes because of someone else. So most people kind of pre-select their property first. Once they know that it's a very high likelihood of purchasing it, then they will go sell their existing property. That's typically how it's done.
And Dan, I do want to move on to a specific acronym that we've been hearing a lot of, and that is Henry. So we're not talking about a specific family or keeping up with the Joneses, as we hear often, but tell us what Henry actually stands for here.
Sure. So, and this has no bearing that my son's name is Henry.
Okay.
It's just coincidence. But the acronym Henry stands for High Earner, Not Rich Yet. So, if you think about it, a typical Henry could be a couple, a married couple. They don't have to be married, but, most likely they have 1 or 2 children. They have well-paying jobs, right? Doesn't matter what sector it is. They have well-paying jobs. They are starting to make enough money where they have the ability now to save, but they don't really have a large taxable portfolio, or in certain cases they don't have any savings, but they might have a mortgage, 401k. So Henrys, typically the ones with children, they still do need a lot of the planning that more sophisticated clients would need, but in many cases a Henry either doesn't have the minimum portfolio size to work with a holistic financial planner, or they don't want to turn over control of their assets.
And can you give us an idea of what the income bracket of a Henry couple or family looks like in the U.S.?
Sure. That'll probably depend, on state and where they live. But I would say, loosely, we could say, probably $250,000 a year combined to north of $500,000 combined.
And that does sound as though that's quite a good income bracket, doesn't it? But what is the issue that Henrys have, especially if they have to plan for retirement, plan for the future?
Sure. It's a great question. So I'll tell you in 1 second. So I would say, a lot of the same issues other people have to deal with. They don't necessarily have to focus on investment management as much because the portfolio is much smaller. But if you think about the married couple, at a minimum they have to get their wills in place, their healthcare proxies, the basic ancillary documents. But it really comes down to also, if you think about equity awards, right? Does the company pay them in stock? There's different tranches of stock with different tax ramifications. It could be as simple as, do they want to do the high deductible health insurance, or with a flexible spending account, or do they want to do traditional? And I also like to do a lot of strategic goal settings. So what we'll do is I'll have them think of 3 or 4 kind of living scenarios in the future, whether it's we want to buy that second house, or we want to buy our first house. Retirement's tough with a Henry because there's such a long time frame that there's so many things that could happen. But I'd like to give them a few scenarios that they might consider, whether it's living out of state or this and that. And by using our financial calculators to model that out in the future, it gives them a good framework. Again, that might not be as pressing as is for someone who's closer to retirement, but we have the software, and it's nice to kind of give people reasonable expectations of where they could be given different circumstances.
And you did mention 529s as well. So when you think about all the different moving parts, especially for a couple or family that has dependents, there are so many different things to consider when it comes to planning. And if they haven't dipped their toes into all these opportunities, can you walk us through different scenarios with a time horizon?
Sure, yeah. So let's talk about, I guess we'll just talk about college planning. So, I've had often, Henrys have said to me, I can't put a lot away. Right? I don't know if I'm going to be able to hit my bogey. I said, just whatever you can do, right? So we have our meeting, whatever their budget allows. They can either do the 529, sometimes a custody account, but you put away what you can put away, and then the next time we meet, hopefully you can increase that. And we also are big proponents of dollar cost averaging, because it sounds simple, and it is, but when you're dollar cost averaging, you don't worry as much about the ups and downs of the market, right? If the market does pull back a lot, well, you have fresh money looking to buy that dip. So by automating that and trying to increase it every year, the likelihood of hitting those goals is very high. On the other kind of trajectory side, I had another Henry who was an entrepreneur, and the company is doing fantastic. It's growing like crazy. And while he doesn't have any trust and estate issues now, because the current trust and estate exclusion is very large, if that gets changed, he'll have significant estate taxes for his children. So in this Henry case, we advised him to take an illiquidity discount on his private company shares and actually put that in trust for his children's name. So, being that it's a private company, you can't get an exact dollar figure what it's worth. You can take significant discounts. And in this case, the company is doing fantastic. And he probably got 2 to 3 times more of the stock out of his personal name than had he not done the planning. So there's so many levers we can push with the Henrys, but we need to check every part of their life. And in fact, pull up the slide really quick. We pull up. So we pull up slide 6, right? That'll give a little bit of an idea of what we do. Okay, and then I think if we go to slide 7 as well, I think a differentiator with our Henry practice is the fact that we ensure that those ancillary documents, the wills, the trusts, we ensure those are actually drafted and then stored in our online vault, in the Raymond James vault. So while we do not do the drafting ourselves, we're not trust and estate lawyers, we refer that out. We have to get that box checked. It has to get done in order for us to deliver our plan. And then I would say lastly, for the Henrys that actually don't, that choose our flat fee, that actually do not have us invest their money, they still have access to the Raymond James systems. They can add all of their external accounts to the Raymond James system so they can see everything in one place. They can use our vault. They can use our free credit monitoring, bill pay. So, for certain clients that they really want to do their own investing, they can still come to us for the holistic planning, access our systems, and never actually have us manage their portfolio.
Well, Dan, it does seem as though we'll continue to hear this acronym. The Wall Street Journal put out an article last week that is called Meet the Henrys, the 6-figure earners who don't feel rich. So when you're a Henry, high earner, not rich yet. A hefty salary isn't enough to buy freedom from financial pressure.
I missed it. I'll have to read that.
Yes, and it does show a couple of $100 bills spinning around in a hamster circle. So I think it's quite befitting to see this on the journal, and I'm sure this is something that we'll continue to see mentioned in financial media. But tell us how you identify this opportunity.
It's as simple as me hearing the acronym several years ago, and I actually kind of, in retrospect now, wish I had my Henry promotion, had the Henry offering for one or two clients, because they fit the box, right? Very well educated. They, like in one case, the wife just got her dream job, right? The portfolio was small, but they were in their early 30s. They were doing fantastic financially. They needed my services, but they didn't want to turn over their portfolio, and it wasn't a fit. But with the I thought long and hard about that. With the Henry offering, they can still get all the holistic advice they need. I mean, all those check boxes we can check, and still deliver a very robust wealth management offering. So I think it was kind of, if you learn from your failures, you kind of see what's out in the market. And I think the big thing that made me think about this was, setting myself apart from the competition and making sure those trust and estate planning documents, the actual hard copy file is part of it, and then we have the backup storage online. So that's partly how I did it.
And while we're on the topic of Henrys, you've identified this opportunity, and it is indeed an opportunity. But on the flip side, are there any risks or other considerations that you have to keep in mind?
Sure. With Henrys in general, or just you're saying like with my clientele?
Both.
Both, yeah. I mean, there's always risks. I mean, that's probably when we're going through clients, and if we're managing their money, or even if we're not, I think for us the biggest thing is to find out where is the biggest risk, right? And that risk could be spending is too big versus the size of the portfolio, or the time horizon is just so long. The risk can be as simple as there's no long-term care planning, or sorry, no long-term care insurance. So for us, that's our first job, is to identify the risk. And different clientele have different risks. A business owner, they have key person risk. So it could be the number 2 partner who's the rainmaker, right, the head of sales. If that person either leaves or gets sick, that's going to be a major hit to the business. So as crazy as that sounds, if there are ways to hedge risks, it's our job to at least point the risks out and show the client all the solutions. They might not make sense, it might not be a fit, but our job is to point out the risks and at least have the client either accept the risk or hedge it somehow.
And Dan, I imagine that someone in your position advising these high earners, not rich yet clients, although they are high earning, there's a reason why they're not rich yet. So what does rich actually mean in terms of a total sum here?
That's a great question. I don't think there's a number on rich. I think it probably has to do with flexibility. If you own your own business, or if you're a lawyer, you have your own practice. I think the ability to earn a good living, to believe that you're saving a good amount of money, to believe that you're on track to hit all the financial expense goals that are out there, and then having satisfaction in what you do. So rich for one person could be completely different rich for someone else, but I believe it's having that financial flexibility is probably the number 1 part of why someone would think they're rich.
And I do believe sometimes when you're talking about financial education or financial literacy, just because you have a high income or you have a high earning team partners,
Sure.
husband, wife, whatever that might entail, it's easy to live beyond your means, right? So
Extremely.
if you're used to that, but at the same time you're highly indebted, maybe you have a lot of student loans. If you're highly educated, maybe
Private
you,
school
right?
in the city sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you're talking about dependence, tuition, planning ahead for their college education. I know that when I went to undergrad many, many moons ago, tuition was considerably cheaper, and now you're looking at possibly 5-digit, 6-digit
Yeah.
price tag for 4-year college education. And if you're talking about highly educated clients here, not only did they go to undergrad, but perhaps they got a master or even 2 masters or even a doctorate, right?
Absolutely,
So
100%.
if they're accustomed to a certain way of living, they might be used to charging, vacations, taking out more loans for cars. So what do you tell these Henrys?
That is a great question as well. So, I'm not afraid to be blunt, because I think that's what they're paying you for, right?
Yeah.
They're not paying you to, sugarcoat things. You can be blunt but respectful. So what I try to do is I try to analyze, their spending patterns, and I try to just, whatever is the biggest red flag to me, I try to highlight that.
Okay.
And there have been cases where, I've advised clients to leave the city, right, because the rent is sky high, and then there's the private school, and, finding a house in the burbs, will save them several $100,000 a year. They were not too keen on the idea at first, but I showed them if they were just compounding numbers, if they're saving this amount in the city versus saving that amount at home, I showed them how easier all their goals are going to be in 10 years. So in that case, it took them a little longer, but they got out, and I think their expenses are 2/3 of what they were. And then in other cases, people don't listen, but you do your best. And if you're sincere, you really put their needs first, most of the time they listen. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, and I think when you're talking about clients who are accustomed to a certain lifestyle or way of living, it must be very difficult to say, hey, if you do X, Y, and Z, the compounded returns will get you to your goal sooner rather than later.
Sure. It's hard because when you're having those conversations, you have to focus on the human element. It can't just be rattling numbers off because they lose interest. But if you're able to find their motivation, what motivates them, and bring the human element to it, the chances of them listening are higher. But again, you just have to find out how to make the client the most receptive and how to deliver the information respectfully.
Well, Dan, it's been a pleasure having you join us here at the New York Stock Exchange. We appreciate your time, and thank you so much for sharing all of your insights with our viewing audience.
Oh, it was great. Thank you very much as well.
Thank you so much, Dan. And that does wrap it up for Global Money Talk live from the New York Stock Exchange. We're so excited to bring you daily coverage here on SamPro TV. You can check out the show anytime on our YouTube channel by searching Global Money Talk. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you back here tomorrow morning. Have a wonderful day.